So picture this. It's 1999, and there is a spent 20-gauge shotgun shell just resting on the carpet of this incredibly bloody bedroom floor.
Right.
And this is in a super exclusive neighborhood in Austin, Texas. Now, the woman who actually brought that gun into the house, the one who aimed it at a sleeping man and pulled the trigger, she only ended up serving 10 years in prison.
Yeah, 10
Yeah.
years. And today, she's just walking free.
Exactly.
Hmm.
She is totally free. But the woman who was nowhere near that bedroom on the night of the shooting, I mean, literally wasn't even in the room. She is currently sitting in a Texas prison, and she won't even be eligible for parole until the year 2042.
It is honestly one of the most staggering disparities I think we've ever seen in the modern justice system. And the path to get there is just incredibly complex.
It really is. So welcome to this deep dive. We're thrilled you're here with us today because if you are joining us, your mission is to help us unpack this massive true crime saga that, honestly, it fundamentally redefines how we look at psychological manipulation.
Absolutely. And extreme wealth, too. Plus, the very boundaries of the law itself.
Right. We are looking at a case that completely tore through the Texas elite. And to do this for you, we've pulled together just a massive stack of sources.
We really have.
We've got historical journalistic reports from CBS News, local Austin affiliates, but more importantly, we are diving deep into the actual appellate court documents.
Yeah, specifically from the cases of Beard versus State and Johnson versus State.
Exactly. And we also pulled the highly detailed forensic and medical analyses that were presented at the trial.
Which are fascinating. And the stakes of this deep dive, for you listening, are profound. I mean, this isn't just a standard whodunit mystery.
No, not at all.
It's a masterclass in the mechanics of the Texas law of parties. How the state can prosecute the architect of a crime rather than just the literal foot soldier.
Right.
And furthermore, it's this terrifying, almost clinical look into how therapeutic spaces, specifically inpatient psychiatric wards meant for healing, can be entirely hijacked and weaponized for psychological grooming.
It's so dark. Today, we are going to figure out how the law managed to look past the literal smoking gun to catch the puppeteer who was actually pulling the strings. So, okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah, to truly understand the architecture of this crime, we really can't start on the night the trigger was pulled.
Right, that's too late.
Exactly. If we do that, we miss the entire foundation. We have to rewind to the mid-90s in Austin, Texas. We need to look at the socioeconomic context. It's literally the collision of two vastly different worlds.
Okay, let's build that context for everyone. On one side of this collision, we have Stephen Beard. By the early 90s, Stephen is this 70-year-old retired executive for Fox Broadcasting.
A self-made multimillionaire, by the way.
Yes, completely self-made. And he is an absolute pillar of the Austin elite. He lives in Westlake Hills. Now, if you aren't familiar with Austin geography, Westlake Hills isn't just like a nice neighborhood.
No, it's an enclave.
Exactly. It is where the old money, the high-level executives, the true power brokers of Central Texas reside. It's geographically isolated, heavily wooded, and culturally very, very insulated.
Right. It's a community that is fundamentally built on exclusivity. And Stephen Beard was a very well-respected member of that specific community.
We was.
But then, in October 1993, the insulation of all that wealth fails to protect him from a very basic human tragedy. His wife of 42 years passes away from cancer.
42 years. I mean, that isn't just a marriage. That is an entire adult lifetime built with one person.
Precisely. And from a psychological standpoint, when a partnership of that length dissolves through death, the surviving spouse almost always enters a state of profound emotional vulnerability.
Right, their whole world is gone.
Exactly. The daily routines, the shared memory bank, the foundational anchor of their identity is just suddenly gone. They are completely unmoored. And wealthy widowers in that specific state of grief are incredibly susceptible to new attachments. They often lack the normal defensive filters that they might have had, say, a decade earlier.
Which brings us to the other side of this collision, right? Celeste Marie Johnson.
Yes.
So Celeste is 32 years old, making her nearly 4 decades younger than Stephen. And she is working as a waitress at the Austin Country Club.
A distinctly different reality from Westlake Hills.
Totally. She has already been married and divorced 3 times. She is the mother of twin teenage daughters, Christina and Jennifer. And she is basically working a service job just to keep her head above water.
And we really have to analyze the specific geography of where they met, which is the Austin Country Club.
Right.
A country club is a highly structured socioeconomic ecosystem. It provides a very specific vantage point for the people working there.
How so?
Well, if you're a waitress in that environment, you are essentially a ghost observing the city's wealthiest residents. You see their habits. You see who tips well, who drinks too much.
I see.
And crucially, you see their vulnerabilities. You know exactly who just lost their wife because the entire club is gossiping about it.
Oh, wow. Yeah, it's like the perfect observation deck. So Stephen is spending his time at his primary social hub, trying to navigate this terrible grief, and Celeste is there, serving his table.
Yeah.
And the progression of their relationship is nothing short of dizzying. I mean, they meet, they begin dating, and by February 1995, they are married.
It was incredibly fast.
But the timeline isn't even the most shocking part. Right before the wedding takes place, something highly strategic and legally permanent occurs. Stephen legally adopts Celeste's twin daughters.
Right. And that adoption is the first major structural shift in this entire saga.
Why is that so significant?
Well, when we look at high net worth individuals entering into second marriages, there are usually layers of legal protection, right? Like prenups, compartmentalized trusts.
Sure.
But legally adopting a prospective spouse's 17-year-old children before the wedding even happens, that is extraordinary.
Because it fundamentally changes the line of succession for his estate.
Exactly. Legally and financially, that adoption tethers Celeste's children, her progeny, directly to Stephen's substantial estate.
Wow.
They are no longer stepchildren who might just get a token inheritance. They are legally his daughters, entitled to the exact same rights as biological children under Texas intestate and estate law.
That's huge.
It is. It's a legal binding that outlasts the marriage itself.
Okay, I have to pause here because looking at the timeline, it feels like a very specific playbook.
It does.
You know, you find a grieving, wealthy widower, you secure the bag for your children via adoption, and then you lock in the marriage. But let me push back a bit. Is it possible they actually had a genuine connection initially? Or does the speed of the adoption, combined with her track record of 3 prior divorces, point strictly to a calculated business transaction from day one?
Well, that was the exact debate happening in Westlake Hills at the time. Stephen's biological family, his friends, his lawyers, they were all immediately suspicious.
I bet they were.
They harbored deep, very vocal reservations, believing Celeste's motivations were purely financial. They saw the socioeconomic disparity and the speed of the union as massive red flags.
Yeah, it's hard not to.
Right. And to assuage those fears, or perhaps out of his own lingering prudence, Stephen did actually insist on a prenuptial agreement.
Right. And the dynamics of this prenup are fascinating. They signed a marital agreement where Stephen promised to give Celeste $1 million during the course of the marriage. But, and this is the critical lever here, if they divorced, she would only walk away with $500,000.
Right. It's a behavioral economics mechanism built right into a marriage. It is designed to incentivize staying in the marriage, or at least penalize leaving it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
$500,000 is a lot of money, obviously. But relative to Stephen's total net worth, which was in the multi-millions, it was a relatively small severance package.
Okay, so fast forward 2 years to January 1997. Stephen actually makes good on the first half of that promise. He transfers $500,000 into a revocable trust for Celeste.
Yes, he does.
And by doing this, he satisfies his legal obligation to her in the event of a divorce, right? Like, if she leaves him the next day, she gets nothing more. She already has her $500,000.
Exactly. And for anyone unfamiliar with estate planning, a revocable trust is essentially a legal bucket that holds assets. It's managed by a trustee, often a bank, but the person who created it, Stephen, in this case, can alter or cancel it.
Right.
However, the funds inside were made fully available for Celeste's use. Stephen's lawyers likely thought this was a brilliant piece of legal insulation. They capped his liability.
Right, but the insulation only works if the person respects the money. Celeste depleted that entire $500,000 trust in just 6 months.
That burn rate is objectively staggering. I mean, think about the logistics of spending $500,000 in 1997 in just 6 months. We are talking about nearly $85,000 a month in pure discretionary spending.
So what does that actually look like on the ground? How do you even spend that?
It looks like an explosion of lifestyle creep. It's luxury cars, designer clothes, lavish trips, expensive jewelry, and basically just throwing money around to project status.
Wow.
It paints a definitive psychological profile of someone who viewed the marriage not as a partnership, but as an unlimited revolving line of credit. But here is the fatal flaw in her strategy. It wasn't a revolving line. It was a fixed lump sum.
So 6 months later, the safety net is just gone. The divorce cushion is entirely evaporated.
And that changes the fundamental calculus of the relationship.
Yeah, I can imagine.
If Celeste divorces Stephen now, the prenup dictates she gets virtually nothing else. She's already spent her exit strategy.
Oh, wow.
She is trapped in a lifestyle she cannot afford to maintain on her own, married to an elderly man she doesn't want to be with. The financial trap has snapped shut.
Okay, so this panic, this realization that she has spent her way into a corner, brings us to the spring of 1999. Because if the marriage was the financial trap, a local psychiatric hospital is about to become the recruiting ground for her ultimate escape plan.
Right, and this transition into the clinical space is where the story shifts from a tale of standard greed into a terrifying study of psychological manipulation.
Yeah.
In early 1999, Celeste checks herself into St. David's Pavilion, which is a well-known mental health facility in Austin. She is supposedly seeking treatment for severe clinical depression.
Now, an inpatient psychiatric ward is a very specific environment. People are stripped of their normal defenses.
Completely.
They are wearing comfortable clothes, attending group therapies, sharing their absolute deepest traumas with strangers. And while Celeste is navigating this vulnerable environment, she meets a woman named Tracey Tarlton.
And Tracey's background is vital to understand here. She isn't a career criminal. She isn't a grifter. Tracey is a highly respected, functional professional.
Yeah, she manages book people, right?
Exactly, which is Austin's largest and most famous independent bookstore. It's a true cultural institution in the city. To run a logistics and retail operation of that size requires serious intellect, organization, and social capability.
But despite that professional success, Tracey obviously has her own demons. She has been admitted to St. David's for bipolar disorder.
Which means she is experiencing severe mood swings, periods of mania followed by crushing depressive episodes.
Right.
And when you place two women in a highly vulnerable, isolated clinical environment, the traditional boundaries of friendship evaporate very quickly. What starts as a friendly relationship, having dinner in the cafeteria, chatting in the common rooms, rapidly intensifies.
It escalates to the point where they are both later transferred to Timberlawn Hospital in Dallas for further treatment. And at Timberlawn, they actually share a room.
Right.
They're literally living together in a psychiatric facility until the hospital staff catches Tracey giving Celeste a massage that crossed clinical boundaries, at which point they are physically separated by the staff.
And that physical separation by the staff likely only intensified the bond. It created this us versus them dynamic.
Absolutely. But the physical aspect of the relationship is really secondary to the psychological architecture Celeste was building.
Oh, without a doubt.
Because Tracey testified that during these weeks together, Celeste began systematically painting her husband, Stephen, as an absolute monster.
Yeah.
She didn't describe the benevolent millionaire who adopted her teenage daughters. She described a man who was, in her own words, slowly killing her. Celeste claims Stephen was emotionally crushing her, belittling her constantly, and driving her to the absolute brink of suicide.
This is a textbook example of advanced psychological grooming within a trauma bond.
Okay, unpack that for me.
So a trauma bond often occurs in situations of actual abuse, but it can also be synthetically manufactured. Celeste is essentially weaponizing her own clinical presence in the hospital.
Wow.
She is using her claims of suicidal ideation not as a cry for medical help, but as a hook. Think about it. Tracey is already dealing with the emotional extremes of bipolar disorder and likely feelings of deep social isolation.
Right.
By playing the ultimate damsel in distress, Celeste provides Tracey with a narrative that elevates Tracey into the role of a hero, a protector, a savior.
Okay, I have to push back here because this is the part that is hardest for me to swallow.
Sure.
Tracey is managing a massive bookstore. She manages inventory, payroll, dozens of employees. She is navigating the real world super successfully. How does someone with that level of functional daily responsibility get so completely and totally brainwashed by a woman she just met in a rehab clinic?
It's a great question, and it really speaks to a fundamental misunderstanding we often have about mental health and manipulation.
How so?
Functional responsibility in the workplace does not immunize you from emotional vulnerability in your personal life. In fact, sometimes people who are highly competent at work compartmentalize their emotional needs so deeply that when those needs are finally triggered, the reaction is just overwhelming.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And in psychiatric settings, patients are explicitly encouraged to strip away their professional armor. Tracey testified that she believed everything Celeste told her, without question.
Wow.
She said she felt a profound, agonizing empathy for Celeste. She genuinely believed this wealthy, powerful man in Westlake Hills was torturing this poor woman who had nowhere else to turn.
And once that hook is set, Celeste establishes this lethal boundary. She tells Tracey that they both want an intimate, loving relationship together, right? A life together. But she says it will only be possible if Stephen is dead. She literally conditioned their romantic future on a homicide.
It is the ultimate manipulation of stakes, and she backed it up with a terrifying narrative. Tracey asked the logical question, why don't you just divorce him?
Right. Why wouldn't she?
Celeste countered by claiming she was terrified to simply walk away. She told Tracey that Stephen's wealth and power meant he would hunt her down.
Oh my gosh.
She claimed she could never truly escape him, that he would ruin her life or kill her if he tried to leave.
Which completely reframes the act of murder in Tracey's mind.
Exactly. It frames a murder not as a crime of financial greed, but as a necessary, almost noble act of survival and liberation.
Yeah, she thinks she's saving her.
Right. Tracey isn't thinking, I'm going to kill a guy so my girlfriend can inherit millions. Tracey is thinking, I have to eliminate this monster to save the woman I love from being driven to suicide.
This is so wild. But the grooming wasn't just, hypothetical late-night whispers in a hospital room. When they get out, it escalates into physical action.
Yes, it does.
And this is where the story turns into a series of bizarre, terrifying, and frankly clumsy attempts to kill Stephen before a firearm is ever even brought into the equation.
We can categorize this as the trial and error phase of the assassination plot.
And we know about this phase not just from Tracey, but from the testimony of Celeste's own twin daughters. They witnessed these covert tactics firsthand.
They did.
First, Celeste started messing with Stephen's alcohol supply. Stephen enjoyed a nightly routine of drinking vodka. Celeste would secretly pour out his standard vodka and replace it with Everclear.
And for listeners who might not have encountered Everclear, it is a brand of grain alcohol that is up to 190 proof.
Which is insane.
It is. That means it is 95% pure alcohol by volume. Standard vodka is usually around 80 proof or 40% alcohol.
So if you're pouring someone a standard drink of vodka, but it's actually Everclear, you are more than doubling the toxicity of that drink without them even knowing.
Exactly.
And you have to factor in Stephen's physical state. He is a 70-year-old man. He is clinically obese. He has diabetes, and he suffers from chronic pulmonary disease.
The biological implications of that are severe. When you introduce 95% pure ethanol into the system of an elderly diabetic, you aren't just getting them drunk. You are triggering a massive metabolic crisis.
What happens to the body?
Well, the liver prioritizes processing the heavy load of alcohol, which halts the production of glucose. For a diabetic, this can lead to severe hypoglycemia, a catastrophic drop in blood sugar.
Wow.
And combining that with his pulmonary issues means his respiratory drive is already compromised.
But substituting the alcohol wasn't enough. Jennifer, one of the twins, testified that she physically saw her mother grinding up sleeping pills and hiding them in Stephen's food.
Yes.
Specifically, she was mixing these crushed sedatives into his baked potatoes at dinner.
Let's layer the biology here again. You have an elderly man with respiratory issues.
Yeah.
You are giving him massive hidden doses of central nervous system depressants, the sleeping pills.
Yeah.
And you are washing that down with 190 proof grain alcohol. This combination is highly synergistic. It basically suppresses the brain's signal to the lungs to breathe.
So she's trying to stop his breathing.
Yes. These methods served a dual purpose for Celeste. On one hand, she was actively trying to induce a fatal medical event, a slow poisoning that would look entirely natural to a coroner. An old, sick man had a few too many drinks, took his pills, and simply stopped breathing in his sleep.
That's terrifying. So what was the second purpose?
Incapacitation.
Yeah.
Even if it didn't kill him, it knocked him completely unconscious early in the evening. This gave Celeste absolute freedom.
Oh, to sneak out.
Exactly. With Stephen basically comatose in his chair or bed, she could sneak out of the Westlake Hills mansion at night. She was leaving to spend nights with Tracey Tarlton.
Right.
And, incredibly, she was also using this time to maintain a secondary affair with her ex-husband, Jimmy Martinez.
Wait, what? So she is drugging her current husband to sleep with her future girlfriend and her past husband.
Yes.
The layers of deception are just astounding. And the attempts on Stephen's life get even more direct from there. Tracey testified about a night she actually came over to the Beard house.
This part is so disturbing.
It really is. She walks into the dining room and finds Stephen completely unconscious, slumped over the dining room table, just dead weight.
Hmm.
Tracey actually helps Celeste physically move his heavy, unconscious body from the chair down to the floor. And then, as Tracey stands there watching, Celeste takes a plastic trash bag and places it completely over Stephen's head to asphyxiate him.
It's a visceral escalation from passive poisoning to active mechanical murder.
But the plastic bag attempt obviously failed. He survived. They also made an attempt to manufacture their own biological weapons, which sounds crazy.
It does.
They found a poison recipe book and actually attempted to grow botulinum toxin.
Yeah, botulinum toxin causes botulism. It is one of the most acutely lethal neurotoxins known to science. It blocks nerve functions and can lead to respiratory and muscular paralysis.
So they were trying to brew it at home.
They were trying, but cultivating a lethal, pure strain of it in a home kitchen from a book is incredibly difficult, which is why that bizarre science experiment also failed.
It's pure trial and error. Poisoned potatoes, Everclear, plastic bags, home-brewed toxins. It's almost cartoonish if it weren't so deadly serious.
Exactly.
But eventually, the slow methods are taking too long, and a hard deadline emerges on the horizon. Stephen, completely unaware of the plots against him, had planned a lavish 3-week trip to Europe for the two of them, scheduled for October 1999.
That European vacation was the true catalyst. It forced Celeste's hand. She realized she couldn't rely on the slow, uncertain methodology of poisoning anymore.
Because she'd be stuck with him.
Right. If she got on that plane, she would be trapped in close quarters with him for weeks. She needed an immediate, violent, definitive solution.
So Celeste ramps up the psychological pressure. She starts telling Tracey that she absolutely dreads this upcoming trip. And she isn't just complaining to Tracey either.
No, she's telling everyone.
She actually tells the receptionist at her hair salon that she hated the bastard and didn't know how she was going to survive a vacation with him. She tells Tracey point blank that if she is forced to go on this trip, the emotional abuse and the confinement will drive her to commit suicide.
Once again, she is leveraging the ultimate threat of self-harm to compel Tracey into immediate action. It's this artificial ticking clock. If you don't save me now, I will be dead before the trip is over.
This intense pressure culminates on Friday, October 1st, 1999. They hold a planning meeting at the Beard estate. Celeste knows about Tracey's background. Tracey is an avid skeet shooter and owns a shotgun.
Right.
So Celeste essentially takes the role of a general handing down specific tactical directives to her foot soldier.
The logistics of this planning meeting are chilling because they completely remove any defense of a crime of passion. What were the specific parameters Celeste laid out?
First, the weapon. She explicitly tells Tracey to use her 20-gauge shotgun. Then, the target area. She instructs Tracey exactly where to shoot Stephen in the stomach.
And why the stomach?
Because Celeste reasoned that a shotgun blast to the abdomen would be less messy for the bedroom than aiming for the head or the chest.
Think about the cold, calculating nature of that instruction. She is orchestrating the murder of her husband, and her primary concern is the cleanup of the upholstery and the drywall.
It's sociopathic.
Truly.
Yeah.
And she didn't just plan the ballistics. She mapped out the entire operational security of the estate.
Absolutely. I mean, Westlake Hills mansions aren't exactly easy to stroll into. So Celeste provides the blueprint. She tells Tracey exactly where to park her car on the street to avoid being seen by the neighbors. She ensures that the house is relatively empty by sending her daughter Jennifer away for the weekend to their lake house. On the night of the attack, Celeste intentionally leaves the driveway security gate wide open.
Just rolling out the red carpet.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
She deactivates the home's electronic alarm system, and she leaves a specific side door unlocked for Tracey to enter.
The execution of this plan happens at roughly 3 a.m. on the morning of October 2. Tracey drives over in the middle of the night. She parks in the designated blind spot. She walks to the open gate, bypassing the disabled alarm, and enters through the unlocked side door. She navigates the dark house, enters the master bedroom, and finds Stephen Beard sleeping.
And she does exactly what she was told.
Right. Just as she was instructed. She points the 20-gauge shotgun at his abdomen and pulls the trigger.
The blast goes off. Tracey immediately flees the house, but here is the fatal flaw in the entire grand design.
Yeah, this is crazy.
The specific shotgun Tracey used is an over and under or semi-automatic style that automatically ejects the spent plastic shell casing after firing. Tracey turns and runs, leaving that spent 20-gauge shell resting right there on the bedroom carpet.
Leaving the casing at the scene of a shooting is a massive forensic liability.
Right. So why did she leave it? Because during their meticulous planning meeting on October 1st, Celeste made an explicit promise.
She did.
Celeste swore that after Tracey fired the shot and fled, Celeste would personally clean up the crime scene, find the spent shell, and dispose of it before the police arrived. But she didn't.
The failure to pick up that single piece of plastic and brass is fascinating from a psychological perspective.
I've really struggled with this detail. Why would Celeste, who orchestrated this entire complex plot, fail to pick up the one piece of physical evidence she promised to hide?
Yeah, it's baffling.
Was it just pure adrenaline and panic when the reality of a 20-gauge shotgun going off inside a quiet house at 3 a.m. finally hit her? Or was she so accustomed to having absolute, unquestioned control over that household and her life that she suffered a total blind spot?
Right, like a disconnect from reality.
Did she have what you might call a narcissistic gap, genuinely believing the police would never dare suspect a wealthy, grieving widow in Westlake Hills?
It is highly likely a combination of both of those factors. When you plan a murder on paper, it is abstract. When a shotgun detonates indoors, the concussive force, the noise, the immediate smell of cordite, and the reality of a man bleeding out in the bed that shatters the abstraction, panic is an involuntary physiological response.
That makes sense.
But the narcissistic gap you mentioned is a very real, documented phenomenon in crimes orchestrated by highly insulated, wealthy individuals. They often exist in a reality distortion field.
No, totally.
Wealth buys you out of inconveniences, out of trouble, out of consequences. Celeste may have subconsciously believed she could simply explain away any police inquiry through sheer status. And initially, she tried to leverage that status.
She really did. When the Austin police first arrived at the mansion, Celeste actively refused to let them search the house. She pushed back hard. Eventually, she changed her mind and allowed a delayed search. The officers didn't find much of interest immediately, but they did find that Sletter's spent 20-gauge shell on the floor.
And Tracey's behavior afterward is equally baffling. She didn't execute her own forensic countermeasures. She drove home and just put the shotgun away. She didn't throw it in the Colorado River. She didn't melt it down. She kept it in her house.
And this wasn't just a generic firearm. It was a personalized shotgun with her actual name engraved on it.
Right. Why would you keep that?
Because she was absolutely 100% certain that her partner, Celeste, had sanitized the crime scene as promised. She thought there was nothing linking the gun to the room.
Which brings us to the immediate aftermath of the shooting and the realization that their plan had failed in its primary objective.
Yeah, he didn't die.
Stephen didn't die immediately. What followed the gunshot was a bizarre, tense, 4-month standoff centered around a hospital intensive care unit.
Right. Stephen is rushed from the mansion to Brackenridge Hospital in critical condition. He has a massive, devastating wound to his abdomen. The trauma surgeon on call, Dr. Robert Cassia, has to perform emergency surgery.
It was extensive.
The damage to the digestive tract is so severe that Dr. Cassia has to remove a large portion of Stephen's colon. Because of this, he has to create an ileostomy.
And for clarity, an ileostomy is a surgical procedure where the small intestine is diverted through an opening in the abdomen called a stoma. Waste is then collected in an external pouch.
Okay, got it.
It is a profound life and fundamentally changes how the body operates.
Following the surgery, Stephen is moved to the ICU. He is intubated, meaning he has a breathing tube running down his throat and mouth. He cannot speak.
Right.
He cannot verbally tell anyone what happened in that dark bedroom.
He cannot speak, but his auditory processing and his cognitive awareness are still functioning. He can hear and he can react to stimuli.
And that leads to a really crucial moment. Police officers enter the ICU to try and question him. They know he can't talk, but they're hoping for nods or physical signals. During this questioning, they mention the name Tracey Tarlton to Stephen. And the moment that name is spoken, Stephen becomes highly agitated. His heart rate spikes, he shifts in the bed, he's clearly distressed.
That physiological reaction is a massive clue. It suggests one of two things. Either Stephen woke up just enough to recognize the person standing over him with the shotgun, or, even if he didn't see the shooter's face, he deeply recognized the underlying conflict and threat surrounding Tracey's relationship with his wife.
The police see this agitation. They know they have a lead, but they never get the chance to follow up on it with Stephen.
Why not?
Because the moment Celeste realizes the police are trying to communicate with him, She, along with Stephen's own attorney, a man named David Cooperman, throw up an impenetrable wall of silence.
They initiate a full legal and medical blockade.
Exactly. They completely block the Austin police detectives from interviewing Stephen again. They cite his grave medical condition and the stress it causes him.
Wow.
Celeste actually takes a piece of paper, writes a sign, and physically tapes it to his hospital room door. The sign reads, "No visitors, including police." And she doesn't just leave a sign. She instructs the hospital security guards to physically enforce that boundary.
This specific action raises a profound and troubling question about legal and ethical gatekeeping.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
You have an attorney, Cooperman, who argues he is fulfilling his duty by protecting a highly vulnerable, medically compromised client from the stress of police interrogation.
Which sounds reasonable on paper.
Right, but look at the functional reality of those actions. By acting as the gatekeeper, Cooperman and Celeste effectively silenced the only victim of the crime.
They literally shut him up.
They silenced the only person who could have definitively identified the shooter or explained the motive before his death. It is an immense ethical gray area masquerading as medical protection. By physically blocking the police at the door, they ensure that Stephen's testimony died with him.
Let's track the medical timeline carefully here, because the transition from the gunshot wound to his eventual death becomes the absolute fulcrum of the murder charge.
It's the whole case.
Stephen remains hospitalized for months, battling infections and complications from the abdominal trauma. He is eventually stabilized enough to be moved to Health South, a specialized rehabilitation center, to begin the long process of learning to live with the ileostomy and regain his strength.
Right.
On January 18th, 2000, 3.5 months after the shooting, his doctors determine he is stable enough to be discharged. He is sent back home to the Westlake Hills mansion under Celeste's care.
So he survives the initial attack, he makes it home, but he is only inside that house for a single day.
Right. The very next day, January 19, Celeste picks up the phone and calls his doctor. She complains vehemently about the quality of care he received at the rehab center, claiming he's doing terribly. She demands his immediate readmission to the hospital. He is put into an ambulance and readmitted, and almost the moment he returns to the hospital, his condition absolutely plummets. It is a catastrophic decline. He develops a severe infection. His temperature spikes dangerously high, his blood pressure bottoms out, and he goes into severe septic shock. 3 days later, on January 22, 2000, Stephen Beard dies.
And the determination of the medical cause of death here is paramount. It is literally the difference between an assault charge and a capital murder charge.
Because if he died of something else, it's not murder.
Exactly. Dr. Roberto Biardo, the chief medical examiner for Travis County, performs the autopsy. Dr. Biardo rules that the immediate physiological cause of death was a pulmonary embolism, a series of massive blood clots in the lungs.
Okay.
But crucially, Dr. Biardo traces the origin of those clots. He links the formation of the blood clots directly to the initial trauma of the shotgun wound and the subsequent months of forced immobilization in the hospital bed.
So for those of us who aren't doctors, can you explain the biological mechanism there? Like, how does a shotgun wound to the stomach cause a blood clot in the lungs 4 months later?
Yeah, it's a cascade effect known medically as deep vein thrombosis, or DVT, leading to a pulmonary embolism. When a patient suffers massive trauma like a shotgun blast, the body's natural response is to increase blood clotting factors to stop the bleeding.
Right.
Combine that hypercoagulability with prolonged immobilization, lying in a hospital bed for months. Without the leg muscles contracting to pump blood back to the heart, the blood pools in the deep veins of the legs. Clots form in that pooled blood.
And then they move.
Exactly. Eventually, a piece of that clot breaks off, travels through the venous system, passes through the heart, and gets lodged in the pulmonary arteries of the lungs. It blocks blood flow to the lungs, which causes oxygen levels to plummet and strains the heart until it fails.
And the legal significance of that mechanism?
It establishes the unbroken causal chain. Without that direct medical link, the defense could argue Stevens survived the shooting and died of something completely unrelated months later, leaving the state with only an aggravated assault case.
Wow, okay.
But because Dr. Biardo established the medical link between the gunshot on October 2 and the fatal clot on January 22, the state of Texas had the foundation to charge capital murder.
Okay, so while Stephen is fighting for his life and eventually dying under this cloud of suspicion and medical blockades, the Austin police are not sitting idle. They are actively putting the pieces together.
Right.
And the fascinating part is they aren't getting their clues from criminal masterminds slipping up. They're getting the key to the case from teenage gossip.
The unraveling of Celeste's supposedly perfect plot begins almost the minute the gun goes off.
Yeah, let's go back to the night of the shooting. Jennifer, the twin daughter who was sent away to the lake house for the weekend, hadn't gone alone. She brought her boyfriend and another friend with her. When they get the frantic call that Stephen has been shot, the teenagers all rush back to Austin and go straight to Breckenridge Hospital. They're sitting in the waiting room. An Austin police officer named Paul Knight approaches the group of teenagers. He asks a standard investigative question. Do you have any idea who might want to hurt Stephen?
And what do they say?
Without missing a beat, without needing to confer with each other, the teenagers give him Tracey Tarlton's name.
They didn't have to launch a grand investigation. The teenagers already knew about the relationship. They had seen the dynamic between Celeste and Tracey.
Right.
Teenagers are incredibly observant, especially regarding the secret lives of their parents.
And this single tip from a teenager's boyfriend leads Detective Rick Wines straight to Tracey Tarlton's front door. They interview her. They ask a very simple question. Do you own a 20-gauge shotgun? Tracey, perhaps thinking the gun is untraceable because the shell was supposedly removed, says yes. The police take the gun. They run ballistics. The firing pin and extractor marks on the spent shell found on the bedroom floor match her personalized shotgun perfectly.
It's a perfect match.
As Detective Wines stated later, 2 and 2 to me has always been 4. The evidence was undeniable. Tracey Tarlton is arrested on October 8th, just 6 days after the shooting.
The foot soldier is captured, but Tracey doesn't break. She sits in an interrogation room and stays completely silent.
She takes the fall.
She believes she's protecting the woman she loves, operating under the delusion that they're still a couple and that Celeste is waiting for her.
Tracey is sitting in a jail cell, acting like the ultimate stoic, loyal soldier. She is facing decades in prison, and she is keeping her mouth shut to protect her partner.
Right.
But then we jump forward to July 2000. Tracey has been in jail for 9 months. Stephen is dead. Tracey is sitting in her cell, and she gets her hands on a local newspaper. She reads an article about the grieving widow, Celeste Beard.
And what did the article reveal?
It reveals that Celeste has moved on. She hasn't just moved on, she's gotten married again. She married a bartender named Cole Johnson in a ceremony in Aspen, Colorado, just 6 months after Stephen's death.
Imagine the psychological impact of reading that in a concrete cell. The spell is instantaneously broken.
Completely shattered. Tracey looks out the barred window of her cell and realizes her general is wearing the enemy's uniform. She realizes the entire relationship, the promises of a beautiful life together, the desperate claims of abuse and suicidal ideation. It was all a manufactured farce.
All of it.
She realizes she was nothing but a pawn, a loaded weapon pointed by someone else.
And when a loyal soldier realizes they've been betrayed by their commander, they flip.
In March 2002, just days before her own murder trial is set to begin, Tracey strikes a massive plea deal with the prosecutors. She agrees to accept a 20-year sentence in exchange for her full, unvarnished testimony that Celeste Beard orchestrated the entire murder plot.
So Tracey is taking 20 years. But while she was sitting in jail making that decision, we really have to look at what Celeste was actually doing out of the free world. Because she wasn't just marrying bartenders in Aspen.
Oh, right. This brings us to one of the most wild subplots of the entire case, the hitman plot.
It's insane.
Think about the logic here. Tracey is sitting in a cell taking the fall. Logically, you would think Celeste would be keeping her head down, living quietly, trying not to attract the attention of the state.
You'd think so.
But instead, after Stephen dies, Celeste is living a highly visible, lavish lifestyle. She hires a personal assistant named Donna Goodson. Sometime after Stephen's death, Celeste and Goodson go on a gambling trip to a casino in Lake Charles, Louisiana. During this trip, amidst the slot machines and table games, Celeste's paranoia begins to spike. She realizes that as long as Tracey is alive in that jail cell, there is a risk she might talk to the police. So Celeste casually asks her assistant, Goodson, if she knows anyone who could get rid of Tracey.
To which Goodson essentially replies that anybody can be gotten rid of, provided the price is right.
So Celeste literally opens her checkbook. She starts making payments to Goodson. She gives her $500. Then later, another $2,500. Then another $2,500.
Wow.
In total, Celeste pays her assistant over $12,000 for the explicit purpose of hiring a contract killer to murder Tracey Tarlton inside the county jail.
It's just so brazen.
Celeste is so committed to this new plot that she even drives Goodson past Tracey's house and points out Tracey's car just in case Tracey manages to get out on bail before the hitman can get to her in jail.
It demonstrates a terrifying, almost delusional level of hubris. Let's look at Celeste's post-murder behavior holistically. The explosive spending, marrying a bartender 6 months after her husband's murder, casually soliciting a hitman through an assistant at a casino.
Yeah, it's a lot.
It all points to a deeply ingrained psychological belief that her newfound wealth made her fundamentally untouchable. She truly believed she'd crossed a financial threshold where she could simply buy her way out of any consequence, whether that meant buying a lawyer or buying a bullet.
But the reality of the justice system eventually catches up, and she couldn't buy her way out of a Travis County courtroom. In 2003, Celeste Beard Johnson finally goes on trial for capital murder.
And once Tracey flipped and took the plea deal, the state had its star witness.
And he did.
But bringing down a wealthy, presentable widow in front of a jury required a massive effort, including turning her own flesh and blood against her.
The 2003 trial was a theatrical, highly contentious legal battle. The state's narrative was sharp and unyielding. Celeste was a cold, calculating, greedy manipulator. To prove this, they brought in the financial managers who handled Stephen's estate.
The money trail.
Exactly. They presented ledgers showing that in the mere 4 months immediately following the shooting, while Stephen was fighting for his life and dying in the hospital, Celeste spent over $700,000.
And to cement that image of cold greed, they brought Donna Goodson to the stand to testify about a specific meeting Celeste had with the Dallas bank that was managing the trust.
Oh, this quote.
The bankers, seeing this massive outflow of cash, tried to intervene. They told Celeste they wanted to put her on a budget to preserve the principal of the estate. And according to testimony, Celeste looked at the bankers and told them, "You used to kiss my husband's ass, now you're going to have to learn to lick my a-hole."
That quote is devastating in a courtroom. It strips away any veneer of the grieving widow. It paints a portrait of a woman who felt absolute, crude entitlement to the fortune, completely devoid of empathy or grief for the man who generated it.
But the defense wasn't going to just roll over. Celeste hired Dick DeGuerin, one of the most famous high-powered defense attorneys in Texas history.
And he's good.
Very good. And DeGuerin fought back with an incredibly aggressive narrative. He didn't just try to poke holes in the state's case, he constructed an entirely alternative reality for the jury.
He deployed what we can call the psychotic fantasy defense.
Exactly. DeGuerin stood before the jury and argued that Tracey Tarlton was deeply, dangerously mentally ill. He argued she was prone to severe delusions and that the entire romantic relationship between her and Celeste, and therefore the entire murder plot, existed strictly within the confines of Tracey's diseased mind.
Wow, turning it all back on Tracey.
Right. He painted Tracey not as a manipulated victim, but as a predatory stalker acting out a lethal, obsessive, fatal attraction. To support this, the defense brought in a woman named Katina Lofton, who had been Tracey's cellmate in jail.
And what did she say?
Lofton testified that Tracey had confessed to her, admitting she acted completely alone to punish Celeste for rejecting her romantic advances.
It is a brilliant defense strategy because it exploits the very real, documented history of Tracey's mental illness. If Tracey is a diagnosed bipolar patient who was admitted to a psychiatric ward, it is not an impossible leap for a jury to wonder if she suffered a psychotic break and acted alone.
And DeGuerin didn't stop at attacking Tracey's credibility. He launched a massive attack on the medical cause of death.
This is where the trial turns into a high-stakes battle of the medical experts. The defense brought in their own heavy hitters. Dr. Terry Satterwhite, a renowned infectious disease expert, and Dr. Charles Petty, a forensic pathologist.
Right.
They reviewed the thousands of pages of Stephen's hospital records and presented a completely different medical conclusion to the jury.
They argued that Dr. Beardo was wrong. They testified that Stephen's shotgun wound to the abdomen, the ileostomy, all of it, was actually healing relatively well.
Wait, really?
Yeah. Instead, they argued that when Stephen was readmitted to the hospital in January, he died from septic shock, caused by a completely independent opportunistic infection. Specifically, a group A streptococcal infection that originated in his groin area caused by chafing or a minor abrasion, which was totally unrelated to the pulmonary embolism or the gunshot wound.
The introduction of Group A strep is a highly specific legal wedge. Group A streptococcus is the family of bacteria that can cause flesh-eating disease. It is virulent, and it is frequently acquired in hospital settings by patients with weakened immune systems.
Right. The defense is arguing a break in the causal chain.
Exactly.
They're telling the jury, yes, Tracey shot him, but the gunshot didn't kill him. A hospital-acquired strep infection killed him. If the jury believes the defense doctor is over the medical examiner, then the legal definition of homicide isn't met. Tracey, and by extension Celeste, didn't actually murder Stephen. They committed assault, and he died of an unlucky infection months later.
It creates a massive window of reasonable doubt. But just as the defense builds that momentum, the state brings out their most devastating emotional witnesses. They call Celeste's own twin daughters, Christina and Jennifer.
It is the absolute emotional climax of the trial, the spectacle of children testifying against their own mother in a capital murder case.
They take the stand, and under oath they dismantle their mother's defense. They testify about her deep vocal hatred of Stephen, how she would call him disgusting behind his back while spending his money. Jennifer provides the most damning testimony. She tells the jury about the nights she physically watched her mother break apart sleeping pills, crush them up, and mix them into Stephen's food. They testify about the strange, highly calculated events on the night of the murder.
Like what?
For instance, Stephen had a beloved dog named Megan who always slept in the bed with him. On the afternoon before the shooting, Celeste intentionally took Megan the dog to the lighthouse, ensuring the dog wouldn't be in the bed to bark or get injured when Tracey walked into the bedroom.
That specific detail about moving the dog is chilling. It completely undercuts the defense's narrative that Tracey acted alone in a spontaneous psychotic break. Moving the dog requires inside knowledge, premeditation, and coordination from the person who controls the household.
But Celeste's defense team fired back at the daughters with a brutal accusation. They argued to the jury that Christina and Jennifer had, quote, 2 million reasons to lie.
Ah, the inheritance.
Right. Because under Texas inheritance laws, if Celeste, the primary beneficiary, is convicted of murdering Stephen, she is legally barred from inheriting the estate. The money would bypass her. And who is next in line? The twins.
Wow.
If their mother goes to prison for life, Christina and Jennifer stood to inherit roughly $2 million each.
Put yourself in the shoes of a juror sitting in that box. You have two weeping young women on the stand pointing the finger at their mother for murder. Their testimony is compelling.
Yeah.
But you were also handed the financial documents showing that the moment they secure a guilty verdict against her, they become millionaires. How do you weigh that?
Right. Does that massive financial incentive create reasonable doubt about the truthfulness of their memories regarding the sleeping pills and the dog? Or are you simply looking at the tragic reality of a profoundly broken family, where the children finally decided to tell the truth, regardless of the money?
It is an incredibly heavy burden for a jury. They had to synthesize competing, highly technical, expert medical testimony about blood clots versus strep infections. They had to evaluate the inherent unreliability of an accomplice witness, Tracey, who had actively negotiated a deal for a lighter sentence in exchange for her testimony. And they had to navigate the heartbreak and the financial conflicts of interest of the daughters.
But the courtroom drama was underpinned by some fascinating, complex legal mechanisms. These are the doctrines that made this conviction possible in the first place, and we have to talk about them, including one appellate ruling that set a state record. Let's start with the bail hearing before the trial even began.
The bail hearing in Johnson v. State is a historic footnote in Texas jurisprudence. When Celeste was initially arrested, the district court set her bail at a staggering $8 million.
$8 million? That is an astronomical figure for a state-level murder charge. Why was it so high?
Well, the state aggressively argued that Celeste was a massive flight risk. Their logic was straightforward. She was incredibly wealthy, she was facing a potential life sentence, and she had a demonstrated history of rapidly liquidating assets and moving money around.
Yeah, that's true.
They presented evidence claiming she had access to at least $3.3 million from the ongoing sale of the Westlake Hills estate and other trust payments. The judge looked at those numbers and set bail at $8 million to ensure she wouldn't just charter a jet and vanish.
That makes sense.
But her new husband, the Aspen bartender Cole Johnson, took the stand. He testified that the state's math was wrong. He claimed they were actually essentially broke, living off credit cards, because all of the liquid cash went to the lawyers to pay for Dick DeGuerin and the defense team.
So Celeste's legal team appeals that $8 million figure to the higher courts.
And the appellate court actually agreed with her. They slashed the bail down to $500,000. The written ruling is fascinating. The appellate judges noted that during oral argument, Both sides essentially agreed that $8 million was likely the largest bail ever set in a reported Texas criminal case.
Wait, ever?
Yes, it was more than 8 times higher than the highest bail previously determined to be reasonable in any Texas capital murder case. The court ruled on a fundamental constitutional principle. Just because a defendant might have access to vast wealth, the state cannot use bail as an instrument of oppression.
Ah,
Bail is meant to ensure appearance at trial, not to serve as a pretrial punishment or a tool to bankrupt the defense.
so she wins the bail reduction. She gets out of jail while awaiting trial. But she still has to face the music in the courtroom. And when she does, the state of Texas prosecutes her not as an accessory, but as the primary offender, using the Texas law of parties. This is Texas Penal Code Section 7.02.
The law of parties is the legal engine of this entire conviction. Under Section 7.02, a person is held criminally responsible for an offense committed by the conduct of another person if, acting with intent to promote or assist the commission of the offense, they solicit, encourage, direct, aid, or attempt to aid the other person to commit the crime.
So, if I understand the mechanics of this, I could be a mile away eating dinner in a restaurant with 50 witnesses, but if I handed someone the keys to a getaway car and a map of a bank vault earlier that day, I am legally considered the bank robber.
Exactly. Think of it like a mafia prosecution. The boss who orders the hit from a social club in New York is just as guilty of the murder as the enforcer who pulls the trigger in New Jersey.
Right.
The law explicitly recognizes that the architect of the crime, the mind that conceives it and directs it, holds equal, if not greater, culpability than the physical instrument used to carry it out. So even though Celeste was in another wing of the mansion, and Tracey Tarlton's finger was the one applying pressure to the trigger of the 20-gauge shotgun, Celeste is legally viewed as having fired the weapon herself.
But the state didn't just charge her with murder. They charged her with capital murder. And to elevate a standard murder to capital murder in Texas, without seeking the death penalty, the state had to prove a specific aggravating element. In this case, they had to prove remuneration. They had to prove she did it for the money.
And this is where Celeste's defense tried to use the bank against the state. Celeste's lawyers argued that the state failed to prove remuneration because, after Stephen died, Celeste didn't actually gain the unrestricted financial windfall she supposedly wanted.
Right, because of the bankers.
Exactly. The bank managing the trust stepped in, put her on a strict budget, and restricted her lifestyle. They argued she didn't get the millions, so there was no remuneration.
But the appellate court shot that argument down completely.
They did. The court clarified the legal definition of remuneration. They ruled that the law focuses entirely on the intent and the state of mind of the defendant at the time the crime is plotted.
Did she orchestrate the killing with the expectation of receiving a financial benefit?
Yes. It does not matter if the actual payout wasn't exactly what she hoped for, or if a bank trustee ultimately restricted her access to the cash. The intent to secure the estate under the provisions of the existing will was more than enough to satisfy the capital element.
So when we step back and look at these rulings, what does this all mean for the justice system? How does the law actually catch the puppeteer?
It means that the prosecution brilliantly and effectively utilized the structural tools available to them. The application of the law of parties in this case ensures that the socioeconomic insulation of extreme wealth, the ability to buy influence or manipulate a vulnerable person into doing your dirty work, cannot be used as a legal shield.
Which is so important.
You cannot wash your hands of the blood just because you possess the resources or the psychological cunning to hire or brainwash someone else to physically spill it.
Let's synthesize this incredible journey we've been on. We have seen how extreme broadcasting wealth, the vulnerability of an unmoored widower, psychological grooming inside the clinical walls of a psychiatric ward, anomalous medical complications involving deep vein thrombosis, and the complex mechanisms of Texas law all violently collided in a single mansion in Westlake Hills.
At its core, it is a profound case study in human vulnerability and the exploitation of trust.
Absolutely. For you listening right now, think about the broader takeaways from the sources we've unpacked today. We've explored the terrifying malleability of the human mind, how a highly capable, functional bookstore manager could be so thoroughly dismantled and convinced that shooting a sleeping man was an act of righteous love and rescue.
It's just chilling.
We've seen the meticulous, unforgiving nature of forensic evidence, how one single, automatically ejected plastic shotgun shell left resting on a carpet because of a broken promise unraveled a multi-million-dollar perfect crime. And we've seen how the legal code can adapt to reach past the physical weapon and catch the mastermind operating safely in the shadows.
If we connect all of this to the bigger picture of the justice system, well, we have to look at the ultimate, tangible outcomes for the two women involved in this plot.
And that leads to a lingering, deeply provocative thought for you to mull over long after we sign off. Tracey Tarlton, the woman who physically brought a loaded shotgun into a sleeping man's bedroom, aimed it at his stomach, and pulled the trigger, took a plea deal. She served just 10 years in a Texas prison. She was released in 2011, and today she lives freely in San Antonio.
Right.
Meanwhile, Celeste Beard Johnson, the woman who was not in the room, who never held the weapon, who never pulled the trigger, was convicted of capital murder. She is currently serving a life sentence. She is not eligible for parole until the year 2042, a time when she will be 79 years old.
It's quite the contrast.
As you think about this case, ask yourself, does this specific application of the plea bargaining system and the law of parties represent the ultimate triumph of justice? A system smart enough to catch the true manipulative architect of the crime, regardless of who held the gun? Or does it reveal a deeply unsettling imbalance within our courts? A system where the person who commits the physical, brutal act of murder can simply buy their freedom by pointing the finger at someone else?
That's a heavy question.
It brings us right back to the beginning. The physical evidence, the blast, the trauma, the shell on the floor belong to Tracey. But the pathology, the greed, and the design of the crime belong to Celeste. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the shadows of Westlake Hills. We'll see you next time.